Hello, everybody, and welcome to our first day recap, wrap up, honest review of starting the season off as a Frenzy Barbarian. So we went as an 8-player team, myself, BT, a lot of awesome members from the community as well, Pool Noodle, Pilot, Sempra, all the brothers. And we played through. We played through as a group. We're still kind of individually farming and sharing items at this point. But we have leveled up the entire time as a Frenzy Barbarian, and we just got to the point right now where I think we've unlocked just about all vanilla content, and that was mostly due in part to our final construction of an Oath runeword. But what I want to do is I want to go over how we have the character built, what your expectations should be, and what I consider to be minimum gear requirements for the character to actually get off the ground and start to feel good. So first off, let's start with the build itself. For our Frenzy build, we're maxing out Frenzy, makes sense. Maxing out Double Swing, which ends up being your highest DPS attack skill once you have your full Frenzy stacks. We are kitting down to Stun so we can get our additional points and do synergies. And I also want to go ahead and pick up Leap just because it's a great utility skill. In Combat Masteries, we have maxed out General Mastery. You're going to use this for any Frenzy build since all the weapons are going to fall into this category. We have 1 point into the rest of our combat masteries and an additional point into natural res, just so we have a little bit more res so we're not as reliant on gear. And then finally, we've picked up just about everything in the Warcry tree as a 1-point wonder, and then maxing out Battle Command. Battle Command is going to give you flat enhanced damage off weapon, as well as bumping up everything that you cast with plus 3 skills, which should be your priority. I would say it would go Frenzy, Battle Command, General Mastery, and then Double Swing. That's how I built it out. And then once you're actually fully kitted into Double Swing, you get to use that for DPS. For our itemization, we are using an Oath runeword. I would say that this is like the piece of gear that once you can build this, your attack range and your damage is at a place where you can actually start putting things into hit recovery before they make their way over to you. For our offhand, realistically, I want this to be another Oath. But for right now, we're actually using an upped Vile Husk. One, it matches the range adder of our Oath, and it also has an 18% chance to hit amplified damage on striking. This right here, it's not effectively doubling our damage, but it's breaking all immunes and one-tapping anything that doesn't have 75 or higher physical damage reduction. We did slam it. It got 10 FCR and poison skill damage because, I don't know, RIP us, I guess. But still, it's a really nice weapon. Before we were using that, we're actually using a Rune Master, and then even before that, we were just using 2 honors in Colossus Swords. That damage was good enough to be running full Nightmare Cows, getting into Tombs in Hell, getting into Stony Tomb in Hell, doing some other like smaller farm areas like Eldritch, Shank, and Pindle. But we needed a source of Cannot Be Frozen, and the damage on a Rune Master is actually good enough to kind of carry you for that early beginning part. Any weapon that's going to give you decent damage, access to open wounds, deadly strike, ignore target defense or minus defense, or crushing blow is really nice here so that you can kind of start steeping up your DPS until you get into a higher tier weapon. For rest of the gear, we're using a Lionheart. This is Baby's First Fortitude. We have a Cyclopean Roar that we dropped a pretty nice ED max damage jewel into. The reason why we have this is because casting Battle Cry while you attack for free is still really good, as well as getting +2 to War Cries helps out, a little bit extra damage, a little bit extra life, and then the run walk speed is actually pretty nice as well, although once you have full Frenzy stacks, you are literally too fast. We're using an all-res amulet right now. We would like to swap into a Saracens, an Atmas, anything that says either attack rating, res, damage, or stats. But this one's really nice because it means that we can spec into damage on the rest of our gear pieces as opposed to having to get res other places. Depending on what you're farming, we're using Leg of Hands when we're doing something like Chaos, just so we have that damage to demons. And if we're not, and also the huge fire res. And everywhere else, we're using a Soul Drainer. I would say that Soul Drainers is kind of just best in slot on this build. And ultimately, I would like a really nice pair of slammed Soul Drainers. That minus enemy physical res and the dual leech are just huge. For rings, we're using random rare rings. Your rings basically need to say damage, attack rating, dual leech, res, life, magic find, kind of in that order. We crafted a blood belt, so we're going to have lifesteal, open wounds, and this one happened to roll with life and dual res, and then any boots. You could be using war travs in this spot. You could be using goblin toes in this spot. You could be using crafted, any crafted boots in this slot. These say run, walk, dual res, and magic find, which is good for our kit. On swap, I have +4 to skills. You should have +6 to war cries here, but I'm lazy and I found a stale clash, so we're using it. Down in the charms, basically anything that says survivability, damage, attack rating, magic find. Honestly, I haven't found the majority of these. Our team found them, and a really good friend of mine by the name of Trev has like absolutely kitted out the vast majority of my charms. So shout out to them. But if you didn't have these charms, you would be farming in Nightmare Cows until they drop, which is where I found, I'd say, about half of them. We're using just enough strength in Dex to equip our gear, and then we're dumping the rest into Vitality. On a melee build, you need to not be in hit recovery. The monsters need to be in hit recovery. So you need to have as big of a life pool as you can manage and have a decent, faster hit recovery breakpoint. When we're fully buffed, so when we fully buff out Battle Command, Battle Orders, and also our Heart of the Wolverine, our damage is 1 to 4k and 1 to 7k. The crit chance from our General Mastery, so about 30% chance to crit. And I would say that the damage feels really good at this point. You will see that attack rating is a little bit low. On Diablo, we have a 75% chance to hit, but everything that isn't Diablo, we're up in that higher 90 to 95% chance to hit. So unless you're fighting either act bosses or the Ubers, you're basically connecting nearly 100% of the time. For the Mercenary, she's using a Witch Wild with IAS jewels in it. As being able to proc amplify damage as often as possible is the most important thing here. She also deals a pretty decent amount of damage. Then we're also using slows target and knockback, and then just generalized survivability and leech for her so that she can get to where she needs to go. And we're using a Fire Mercenary so that we have that Vigor aura. How does it feel? So starting off, testing Frenzy, especially in the open beta, solo farming as Frenzy actually felt pretty good, right? You start off making a Steel and a Malice, you upgrade to Black Rune Word, you can make a Strength Rune Word, you can even make, you can get into an Honor Rune Word pretty easily. You're going to be finding 5 socketable bases like Zweihanders as early as Nightmare. So just being able to get into dual Honor very early on felt good. And then how did the character continue to progress? I had to accept the fact that I'm going to be farming Nightmare Cows for a while until my charm inventory looks pretty decent. And then in addition to that, just kind of slowly upgrading the rest of my gear. Maybe I find a nice set of either like set or unique gloves. We were using 3-piece Saigons for a very long time, and it's easy to transition into 3-piece IK as well. And then once you start finding some of the staples like Laying of Hands and Soul Drainers, you start to get good resistances and damage on your rings. You find a nice set of boots, or like I said, you get into Goblin Toe or Gore Riders or War Travelers. Coming across Cyclopean Roar, this is dropping in Nightmare pretty often, and I would say just being able to get this one piece of gear going makes a huge difference in the early game. But it was really once we had the Oath Rune Word itself where I felt like now the game is open to me. So now I need to just go buff out the rest of my gear, get another Oath, and you're going to be in maps. And keep in mind, this is at the end of day 1. And while I definitely have an advantage with the 8-player group, as well as being able to trade a bit with chat, all of these items have effectively dropped while I was running. We've dropped 5 pull runes, an rune, an ist rune in the first 24 hours, and that was just the runes I was able to snag solo. And then in addition to that, while I bought a Balrog blade for a Lemrune, we actually found a really good alternative base for this. It's actually kind of funny how close these two weapons are. So a Conquest Sword is effectively the average damage range of a Balrog blade. The difference between these two weapons is that they have a difference range adder of 1. That means that the Balrog blade is going to be hitting from 1 additional distance unit sooner than a Conquest Sword. But if I was using a Conquest Sword, that would mean that the Vile Husk would be in the same range as a Conquest Sword itself. It would be a little sketchier, but the average damage would actually be a lot better. And this is just something that we found farming Players 1. I actually ended up running through the Flayer Jungle and the Great Marsh just because those actually have really good drop rates for a Balrog blade, which is what we were looking for. For places that I ultimately want to farm on this build, I think that Catacombs right now is being super slept on. Catacombs 3 and 4 have fantastic new area level 85 specifications. That means that everything there is able to drop everything in the game. The XP is better. And then in addition to that, in PD2, since everything is players 5 drop rates, the amount of clickables that are in Catacombs rival lower Kurast. When you're farming somewhere where you don't need the res and you don't need the additional survivability of Lionheart, you could very easily put on your 4-socketed P Topaz for that extra magic find, or a Scalders if you happen to be so lucky to come across one. And I'm definitely putting this on before I kill people like Indariel, Duriel, and Diablo. What else would I leave you with? As far as like your prioritization for this build, get into 2 honors, get into a Lionheart, stack as much res and survivability as you can in your jewelry slots, and then start making smart decisions, both with what you're trading into and also what you're willing to craft. You could have right now, realistically, a Deadly Strike helmet, Open Wounds belt, Crushing Blow gloves, Deadly Strike or Life Leech boots, and have all of the survivability and attack modifiers that you would need just making stuff out of the extra runes and jewels that you find. I would recommend this build. You definitely need to have a slightly better understanding of how melee works, just because it's going to be a bit squishy early on. These weapons have high strength and dex requirements to be able to wield them, which means you're not going to have as much vitality as some other barbarian builds are going to be able to maintain. So don't be afraid to play it a little bit safer. Don't be afraid to overfarm in those slightly earlier areas, and give this a shot, because Frenzy is just like nutso. I hope that you enjoy this build. I hope that you try it out yourself, and I hope that the Season 4 start has been as fantastic for you as it has been for us. I look forward to seeing you in the next video, and good luck.